Ding, 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 ding. Hear that? That's the sound of all of the notification bells going off because all of your favorite astro YouTubers, yours truly included, have now suddenly released their review of ZW's new smart telescope, the Seestar S50 Pro, that I know many people have been waiting for quite a bit, and I've been testing it. And yeah, this video we're gonna go into the details of what this little beast can do. So first, I'm gonna lose a lot of viewers by giving you the conclusion because yeah, I don't want to waste your time. So conclusion is it's an excellent smart telescope. It's the best sub $1,000 smart telescope that I can think of. The pictures I've been able to get are excellent. It tracks very well both in out-as mode as well as equatorial mode. The software is the same old Seestar software that we know and love. And of course, if you're new to the hobby, and you're okay with a larger type of smart telescope that gets very high quality pictures, then yeah, this is the thing for you. Apparently there's an early bird discount. I think it's gonna be a melee to get that thing. So yeah, if you don't want to go into the details at all, you're wondering like, okay, I'm on the fence, should I buy the Seestar S50 Pro? The answer is yes, link down in the description. Okay, now that I've lost all of my viewers, we can go into the details. I'm not a good YouTuber, am I? I feel like I shouldn't be doing that. Anyway, yeah, going back to this. This is the Seestar S50. And here it is opening up so I can really show it to you in all of its glory, especially at the front here. Because what do we have at the front? We have two lenses. We have the main 50 millimeters lens at the top, and then there is a secondary lens here that is used for wide field and for Milky Way type of photography, exactly like the Seestar S30 Pro that I've already shown on the channel. So behind the telephoto 50 millimeters aperture lens, we have a color sensor. Now ZW doesn't specify this time the actual brand name or make of the sensor. We just know the specs, which are that it has an optical size of 1/1.2 inch. It has a pixel size of 2.9 microns, and it has a resolution of 2160 by 3840 for 8.3 megapixels resolution. But we don't know the exact brand name, make of the sensor. In the end, it doesn't really matter as long as the photos are good, which they are. And just like before, between the sensor and the front, well, we have filters, because you can switch between a normal like luminance filter, your standard stuff, for broadband images, and then inside there's also a dual band, narrow-ish band filter for light pollution protection, and is working great on emission nebulae like the Orion Nebula, the North American Nebula, or some planetary nebulae like M27, the Dumbbell Nebula, etc., etc. So it's just like the Seestar S30 Pro, but more. So the main sensor on the large aperture is 8.29 megapixels. The smaller lens has another sensor behind it, which is also 8.29 megapixels. I'm actually not sure which sensor model it is, but on the large aperture, you're gonna get a field of view of 2.8 degrees. On the smaller aperture, you're going to get a field of view of 63 degrees for really wide field imaging and Milky Way imaging. And if you've already done like a lot of math in your head, and if you were able to do so, like congrats, because I wouldn't be able to do that, and you figured out from the field of view figure that I gave for the large objective that it is not 250 millimeters focal length, but 260 millimeters focal length, congratulations, you are absolutely right. This is a 260 millimeters focal length, so it zooms in a little bit more for a focal ratio of f5.2 in the end. So overall, really, if you're familiar with the Seestar S30 Pro, this is a larger version of the Seestar S30 Pro that has a larger aperture for more light gathering, that has a longer focal length so that it's able to get more details in the targets that you are wanting to image. So it's very good for galaxies. It's very good for planetary nebulas. It's very good whenever you need a lot of details. So whether it's like M27, the Rosette Nebula, the Jellyfish Nebula, you want to go deeper into the Heart Nebula, into the Soul Nebula, you want to go into M51 to some extent, etc., etc. This is where the S50 Pro would excel compared to something like the S30 Pro. Talking about the S30 Pro, you can see here it is. So the S30 Pro is definitely much smaller, in addition to being cheaper. And I think actually they complement one another very, very well. It's actually one of those things where it's annoyingly good because I need to find some bad stuff about it. Otherwise, you guys will think it's a paid review or something like that. Oh, and yeah, talking about that, apparently I think I'm getting this for free. So I'll get to keep it after the review period. Just so you know, so I'm a corrupt human being for whatever reason. If you know the channel, you know that I don't really care. In fact, there are drawbacks to that, but yeah, just FYI, this thing I think is being given to me. So yeah, I am a paid shill, there you go. But yeah, there is at least one drawback that I was able to identify, so I'll get back to it. By the way, in terms of size, it's almost like, if you look at the base of the telescope, so if I show you the base, it's almost like a square, like all sides are kind of like the same dimension. So unlike the Seestar S50, the OG really, which was less bulky. This is, I think, actually slightly more bulky than the Seestar S50. Now, when you buy the S50 Pro, besides the telescope itself, what do you get? You get the case. So very, we're used to that kind of case, which is light and probably cheap to produce, but also very nicely built. And in there, what do we get? We get a manual, which I haven't opened. We get a USB-C cable, which I haven't opened. We get a solar filter, which I have opened, actually used. And on the other side of the solar filter, by the way, I have the little sticker that came on top of the lenses at first to tell us, like, tear off the dust-proof film before use. Never attempt to view the sun through any telescope without proper filtering. Wise words. Couple of more things from the specs themselves. The battery life is advertised as 9 hours, and I think it's relatively true. It might not go all the way to 9 hours, but I did leave the telescope alone from 10 p.m. working on automated plans. It imaged like the North American Nebula and some other targets because why not? And then when I woke up in the morning and I grabbed my phone and opened the Seestar app from my bed, well, the Seestar was waiting for me at still 10% battery life. And actually, I think that was around 6:30 a.m. That's when I typically wake up, and then it had been imaging since 10 p.m. So yeah, there we go. Good battery life. Not the best battery life out there. When I was testing the Vespera 3, which is much more expensive, after a night, it's like the Vespera 3 the battery was still saying like 30-something%, even more. It was very, very good battery life. Not quite that level, but very, very decent, which means that for summer nights, at least, you will not need a spare battery pack for this as long as it's fully charged when you bring it onto the field. Another thing I've mentioned is the resolution that this gives you, 2.9 micron pixels, paired with a 260 millimeters focal length. You really delve deep into your targets, meaning that for very wide field objects that you want to capture without doing mosaics, then the S30 Pro is actually better. But to punch deeper, this is really nice. And one of the things that could really make that completely irrelevant is if the tracking performance was bad. Because yeah, you can have as much resolution as you like. If your tracking is not good, you're not taking advantage of that resolution that the optics give you. The optics, I'll get back to them, they're very good as well, by the way, which is super annoying. But, and this is getting to be kind of a recurring theme here, the tracking is also excellent. I tested this thing both in alt-azimuth mode as well as in equatorial mode, which is like for more advanced users. I'll show you what it looks like later in the video. And I was very reliably able to get 30-second exposures. By default, this thing uses 10-second exposures and takes many 10-second exposures, and then it stacks them together to accurately simulate a very long single exposure. But you can actually tell it to take up to 60-second long exposures, and it will just comply, right? And taking longer exposures can actually be very beneficial when you're in a very dark area. I'm in Tokyo, Japan, so it's a very light polluted area, so it's not that beneficial for me. But it is beneficial in very dark areas with very little light pollution, or when you're using the internal dual band light pollution filter, because then it simulates you being in the darker area, and so it's good to be able to take longer exposures. But yeah, going back to the performance that I saw with this telescope, in alt-az mode, it was easily getting 30-second exposures with no trailing, even though there was a bit of wind. I was checking my phone because you love looking at your phone to see the image develop, etc. And I could not see dropped frames. It kept saying like, yeah, new frame, new frame, new frame, new frame, without dropping them at 30 seconds. Now, my sample may be particularly good. I've been in contact with some other YouTubers working on this during this review period. Some others were more like 20 seconds in alt-az. For me, 30 seconds, no problem. And then came the Equatorial Mode, and that one shocked me. The first time I used it, even 30 seconds had issues, and this is because my polar alignment was not very good to start with. So I really recommend, actually, if you're going to use this thing in Equatorial Mode, polar align twice in the software, twice in a row, to get the best polar alignment possible. After I had done that, and I used Equatorial Mode on multiple nights, I got 60-second exposures, which is the maximum, without any issues, without any trailing, and I could not see dropped frames. It was incredible performance. I was shocked, to be completely honest, at the tracking performance of this telescope in both alt-azimuth mode and equatorial mode. I might have a particularly good sample though, so just keep that in mind. Okay, now let's skip quickly to show you how it works under the stars, because if you're not familiar with smart telescopes, if you want to really see what it feels like to use the S50 Pro, come join me on my rooftop balcony. I'll wait until the sun is nice and down because we have very rare clear skies tonight, and I'll show you what this thing can do. And actually, while I'm waiting for the skies to get darker, I can see the moon back there, so let me show you what it looks like when we use this telescope to check out the moon. So I'm on my Seestar app right now. My telescope is actually set up to be using station mode, which means it connects to my home Wi-Fi. My phone connects to my home Wi-Fi, and therefore they can find each other. But of course, in the field, or anytime, actually even now, the telescope emits its own Wi-Fi. So it's just a peer-to-peer Wi-Fi. It doesn't need any network connectivity or 4G or anything like that. And then your phone can connect directly to the telescope, so you can use it absolutely anywhere, in the middle of nowhere, in the mountains, etc., etc. And for now, we're going to go towards the solar system, and I'm going to tell it to go and find the moon. So I'm going to tap Go to Moon, and we're going to wait for it to do something. Now, I've noticed, at least for the sun, that on this balcony, it tried to use a compass, but my balcony is full of metallic objects and very large telescopes, very close to the poor Seestar. It couldn't really find its way, but it's not actually a big problem, because you can see we have access to a wide-angle lens as well. And that wide-angle lens can be used not only for Milky Way shots or for wide-angle shots, but also as a finder. You can see the moon is almost there, right? So I can tap there and say, go. This is on the wide angle lens, and see what we get on the main lens. And there it's very, very dark, so I may need to go to adjust there and maybe adjust the exposure positively. And there this is, we see the moon there. I can open up a joystick to move the telescope around to really center the moon as we like. There we go. I can tell the telescope to keep tracking the moon now that it's more or less centered. So, okay, keeping the target at the center of the field of view. And we can then double tap on the target to do some autofocus. And there we go, the autofocus is completed. I can adjust some more. I can even do a manual adjustments and can change the gain of the long lens as well as the exposure of the long lens. Of course, we need to be very careful to not overexpose the moon. Just to have a quick look, it's actually really nice. But if we're going to do some actually lunar capture and processing later, we'll want to take some videos, and for that I need to make sure not to overexpose the moon. So it's great to be able to change the exposure like that. And if I switch to video here, I can set the video to be recorded as a RAW format, get like 2x zoom. So we have like the full moon there in the field of view. I might want to move it a little bit. And I actually had to disable the center target area because then it would center only the bright area of the moon, and I want to have like the full moon there. Now I'm in video mode, and if I click record, it's going to take a video of the moon in RAW format that later on, using a computer, I can use to really stack all of the frames, or the best frames that have the least atmospheric turbulence, and then get some really sharp images of the moon. So I'll show you that a bit later. And now I've taken a full minute of video on the moon, and it's super cool to be able to just zoom in and look at the moon through effectively the lens of the telescope. We can of course take photos as well very easily. There they are, and we can look at the photos. Here we have one photo, and by the way, I've also taken pictures of the sun, and taking photos of the sun actually works in exactly the same way as taking those images of the moon. So that way I was able to show you both. Of course, when you're taking images of the sun, you need to place the solar filter on top of the telescope, and it's a magnetic solar filter. It works great. And yeah, so you have already a full package for lunar and solar imaging. Also, while we were waiting for darkness, I want to show you how you would set up this telescope in equatorial mode if you wanted to be really doing like basically astrophotography with this telescope. It's basically the same thing as other Seestar telescopes, but because it is chunkier and heavier, I wouldn't recommend using the default tripod that comes with it. And I went with the TC40 tripod from ZW, which is used for their AM3, M5, etc. sorts of mounts instead, just to make sure that the whole setup doesn't tilt over for no reason, because that would be not very nice. By the way, this reminds me, the tripod that comes with it is basically the same tripod as what came with the original Seestar S50. It's a very good carbon tripod, very light, very stable. It's just a bit short, very portable, made for travel with a smart telescope that you can use for travel. Quiv from the future here. Actually, no, I was wrong. The tripod is significantly improved in a key way. It is that the angle of the legs is now adjustable. There are catches up here so that we can adjust the angle of the tripod legs. Why does that matter, you ask? Well, if you're going to use the smart telescope in alt-az mode, it doesn't matter at all. Probably not. Maybe you have a use case for that. But if you're going to use it in equatorial mode, which, you know, I was using the TC40 for, but instead, I could just make the tripod closer to the ground by using this new angle, something like this. So now the tripod is much closer to the ground, but much more important than that, it is absolutely tilt resistant, right? So you can set up your smart telescope. It does take a lot more footprint. It barely fits on my table here. Yeah, there you go. Now I made it more or less fit. But yeah, you can put the smart telescope on top, make sure that there's one leg facing north, and then put your wedge on top and the smart telescope on top, and you can use it as is. And actually, because it's such a competent carbon tripod, actually this makes me think that I might reuse this tripod both for the S50 Pro, but also for my tiny strainwave gear mount that I got on AliExpress, paired with a cooled astrophotography rig. And with the tripod like that, there is no risk that everything would tilt over, right? So this is great. This makes a tripod that was perfect for a smart telescope in alt-az mode into something, yeah, that I can use not only for the Seestar S50 Pro in alt-az mode, but also for other small portable rigs in alt-az mode. So I checked actually the website from ZW to see if they had news about the TC20. The pictures on their website still show a tripod without those adjustable angle kind of things, but I hope they will be selling it independently because I think it can be good for many other things. Yeah, this is a good tripod. So now I'm wondering why ZW didn't put that in their selling points, because it is a big selling point in my opinion. And I want to thank Luke from the Lucomatico channel for raising that to me. That's why I'm making this last minute addition to the video. I had no idea, I didn't even notice, I hadn't even bothered to check or look, but this is awesome. And it does show that ZW, they thought of the equatorial mode from the get-go, otherwise they would not have done that. And they basically made the tripod compatible with the equatorial mode. So everything I say about using the TC40 for equatorial mode to avoid tilting the scope is no longer relevant, because the tripod provided with the smart scope is enough. Anyway, with that, let's go back to Quiff from the past with his Equatorial S50 Pro on a TC40 tripod. Here, this is the TC40, and I have what we call a wedge. This is something that will allow me to angle the telescope so that the telescope can be pointing basically towards the north celestial pole, which would basically make the telescope parallel to the axis of rotation of the Earth. And so for that, I bought this little wedge, which is normally meant for the Star Adventure star tracker from another brand, but it works great for the Seestar S50. You could use some proper tripod heads as well for the purpose. It's a bit easier with something like this. And then I can put a Vixen dovetail that came with the wedge on the telescope itself. Have it nice and tight at the bottom, and I want to be able to slide that into my wedge by having the power button there at the top of the telescope. And we have the telescope axis, the main axis actually pointed towards the north celestial pole, and the telescope app itself has a process to help you really precisely polar align. Again, I recommend doing it twice in a row just to be safe. And if you have visibility towards the north, the app gives you the ability to choose which area of stars it should use for its polar alignment. Choose the closest to the north for the best precision, in my experience. With that, I'm actually going to set up the telescope on the TC40 tripod, so I don't need to keep using my table, which is not super stable. Although, to be honest, for all of my alt-azimuth tests, so the normal mode of the telescope, I was just using the standard tripod that comes with the S50 Pro on the floor of my rooftop balcony here. So I think this is actually the first time that I use this telescope in alt-az mode on this much beefier tripod. And here I am, all ready to go. And now for real this time, let's wait for darkness. Okay, we are finally at night, even though, as you can tell, we are in Tokyo. The sky isn't particularly dark. Oh man, but it's as dark as it's gonna get. So let's get to it. We have the Seestar S50 Pro turned on, and I have my app connected to it. And so we can go to the stargazing option. I'm not able to do Milky Way testing, so I really focused my testing on deep sky objects. And in this menu, you have the ability to look at the best objects right now. You can also look, let's say I want to specifically look at nebulae, I can choose one. And yeah, let's say M27, we can go to that, the Dumbbell Nebula, a nice classic object there. Tap on Go Gazing. And the telescope says finding object because it has speakers. I modified the volume on those speakers you can from the app to be a bit quieter because honestly it was a bit loud, like kind of shouting at me. And now it's at the lowest volume setting. You can turn it off as well, but I like to have it speak softly to me. So yeah, the usual speak softly, but carry a big smart telescope. There you go. And so now what it's doing is that it's basically orienting itself towards the target. Once it thinks it's close to the target, it takes pictures of the stars and it will compare the stars it detects to a catalog of stars to know exactly actually where it's pointed, and then it will correct its centering. And that's what's happening to it right now. Okay, so now it just told me that the object is centered. It's going to do a few operations as well to get the best tracking possible. So one, and the best image quality as well. One is horizontal calibration, which can be disabled if you don't like waiting. Another one is dark frame calibration, which is off by default. You can turn it on with the menu at the top right, the three dots. Okay, the horizontal calibration is done. So now it's going back to the target once again. Now this horizontal calibration, it only does it the very first time you go to a target during a given night, right? So afterwards it just remembers and it can have very precise tracking like that. Okay, we have the object is centered and now it's preparing for image enhancing. This is a step that when you get the telescope it will not be doing. That's the dark frame calibration. I turned it on because it allows me to have just better image quality in the end. So why not? And it costs me 60 seconds if I'm using the default settings, or if I'm using Equatorial Mode with the longest of exposure lengths of 1 minute, then it will cost me just 5-6 minutes of my time, which I think is absolutely acceptable for the benefits that we get. But this option is turned off by default. And now what it's doing is autofocusing, so using the stars to get the best possible sharp stars. And this is an area, autofocus, that I noticed that the S50 Pro is also very good. Like I've been used to like the old S50 kind of not getting the best focus from its autofocus, kind of not being exactly there. Which is why like focus aids like Bahtinov masks could be very useful, but not this guy. I don't think you will need a Bahtinov mask ever with this guy. The autofocus is very reliable. And now that's it. It's starting the image enhancement, and we'll see the dumbbell nebula appear here. And if I open like the settings menu, by the way, you can see I have all of my settings, and I've decided you have the autofocus here, which I really suggest turning on if it's not. Dark correction, which I also really suggest turn it on. Save each frame. That uses a lot of storage space on the telescope, but it's really awesome if you want to do your own stacking at the end of the session. I don't really do that. But if you've taken pictures of the same target across multiple nights, you can actually ask the Seestar to stack them itself together so that you have multiple nights, bam, smashed into one much better picture using the data from all of those nights. And saving each frame is actually needed. And then another setting that is very important and is turned on by default is the auto LP filter. Depending on the target that you point your telescope at, it will either use or not use the light pollution filter. Typically, if you're going to like a galaxy or to the Pleiades, like a reflection nebula, it will keep the light pollution filter off. This is by design. Whereas if it goes to an emission nebula, like, well, M27, the dumbbell nebula, what we're pointing at right now, it will turn it on automatically because it's great for emission nebulae. And while I was talking, you can see that we already have 1 minute of data. Wow, I was talking a lot. And already we can see the dumbbell nebula. And remember, this is in Tokyo. We're in Tokyo, one of the most light polluted cities on the planet. We're in summer, so it's quite warm, which means that there's a lot of thermal noise in the sensor, and yet we're getting this very quickly, very easily, and that's basically the way that it works. And the more you wait, the better the image will be. Now, one thing that I would love to see is something like we have in the Vaonis Vespera system, which is how much time I should stay on a given target to get decent results. Like if the Seestar could basically compare my location to a light pollution map, and then of course take into account the target and tell me like, yeah, you probably want 30 minutes on this target to get a really nice result. That kind of stuff, that could be very nice for beginners. This is something that Vaonis has, but Vaonis is super expensive. Although their smart scope is very good, but super expensive, especially when this guy is less than $1,000. We can, by the way, look at the star shapes throughout the field of view. Very nice, pinpoint, sharp stars, at least on my sample. The optics on here are very good. We'll have a look, a deeper look on the frames later on once I do some manual processing of the results of the telescope. But you can see just with 2 minutes, we're starting to get more and more the lobes of the nebula on the top and the bottom of it. We see the corkscrew structure there in the center, and it just works, right? And I can play with stuff like contrast and say like, yeah, I want a bit more contrast like that. So I have the sky is darker, despite the fact that you can see the sky is not dark at all, unfortunately. But you can amend those things, and you can basically, now that the time has come to just wait. And if you're just observing like that, you can hop from target to target and be kind of amazed. And if you're able to take the S50 Pro to a darker area on a trip or something like that, it's a blast to jump from target to target. And because of the reach of the focal length and the sensor, which is more than the S30 Pro, you can really get more detail on objects like this one, which are relatively small objects, are objects like M51, the Whirlpool Galaxy, that kind of stuff, which I've taken pictures of with the S50 Pro. We'll look at them a bit later. And then at any time, you're like, oh yeah, I kind of like the picture that I'm seeing now. Now I'd like to see exactly what sort of picture I would get with some post-processing, right? So in that case, at any time I can tap on the AI Enhance tool here. I will crop the image very close to what we want. Click Next, wait a little bit, and then immediately it gives us like options to reduce stars or not. So this one doesn't really require much star reduction, but when you have a wide field nebula, like the North American nebula, this can be actually very convenient. And we can compare before and after. You can see it does a lot of noise reduction, perhaps a bit too much noise reduction. But here we have the star reduction. We can play with the brightness, the contrast, the saturation, and also with the noise reduction. So I was saying there was a bit too much noise reduction. I can lower that quite a bit. I can really put it to taste there. And that gives us a very nice little image there. I mean, this is only 2 or 3 minutes, no, 2.5 minutes, I think, when I press the button from Tokyo. And this is before and after processing. And I'm done, and I can share that, and I can save that. I can even save the processed image as a RAW file to do further processing on later on. And of course, the Seestar S50 Pro leaves all of the stacked images and optionally the individual subframes on its memory, so you can connect it to a computer via USB-C or even over network and just download the stacked images and process them yourself. And while I was talking, by the way, and while we were doing that processing, the S50 was taking more and more images and stacking them more and more, so we can see we have a clearer and clearer image. And at the top right, you can see that it has stacked 26, ignored 0, and this is something that was a problem with the S50 gears and tracking, was that you would lose in Alt-Az mode maybe like 20 to 30% of the images due to tracking issues. S50 Pro, you don't have that issue at all with the default 10 seconds. And even with 30 seconds, I didn't really see any lost frames. And I mentioned before, Equatorial Mode, same thing. It's really amazing. Maybe I can try going to another one of those nebulae, let's say the Veil Nebula, West Veil Nebula. Hopefully it's visible right now. It might be hidden behind the roof. Okay, we're told the object is centered, and now, there we go, it starts enhancing the image. Just like before, it doesn't need to take dark frames. Again, it doesn't need to do the horizontal calibration that it did earlier. So you can see for the second target, it's much faster to get started. That said, I just noticed it seems to have made a mistake. It didn't turn on the light pollution filter. So I'm stopping the capture, turning on the light pollution filter, and starting the capture again. Okay, we've been exposing on the this Veil Nebula for just 4 minutes. This is a difficult target actually, and it's good that we're able to see it. And that's it. That's, you know, the standard star hopping or target hopping stuff that you can do with the telescope. But let's say you're dissatisfied because sure, the West Veil is here, but you know there's a lot of more nebulosity around it that you'd want to capture at the same time. What would you do? Well, you can go to the Atlas, and there what you can tap on is framing. And you say you want a much larger framing, and you want to move this around and be something like this. And now you can see we have a massive framing area, and we have all of that massive Veil Nebula, the entirety of it, in the field of view. And then we can tap on Go To, and we're going to switch the object. And now, just like before, it will start enhancing the image, except that it will do it in a different manner. It will basically take small images all around the target to take a mosaic. And that takes a lot more time, actually, because now you need to have each panel of your mosaic, you need to expose it for a long amount of time to get a nice signal-to-noise ratio. So that's where, if you want a large field of view in one go and you're not going to zoom in or print your result on a very large paper, etc., then a wider field of view telescope like the S30 Pro might be better, because then you have access to a wider field of view natively without needing to do the mosaic. And you can see here, the telescope is already preparing itself to do the mosaic. So it's taken one exposure at the center. It's going to keep enhancing that exposure at the center. If I stop moving on my chair because we're on a slab of wood, so whenever I move, this poor thing moves as well and cannot align the exposures together. But there, you can see, it's suddenly adding a second pane, and it will do that until it has the entire thing covered, and it will keep going and going and going, covering everything all the time. And that takes a much longer amount of time to get the same signal to noise ratio across the entire image. So that's where, if your objective is wider field of views, then the S30 Pro is probably better. But if your objective is to zoom in to targets like crazy, then the not like crazy, but more than the S30 Pro, then the S50 Pro, also with its amazing tracking, is excellent for that. So that's where this is all coming from. Now, if I go back to the app proper, we have some other things that are very interesting. There's post-processing, as I mentioned, so you can do your AI enhance anytime you want from any of the pictures that you took with the smart telescope. You can do your deep sky stack. This is when you've taken pictures of the same target across multiple nights. Then you can stack them together, assuming you've turned on the save individual frames option in the advanced settings. And that lets you really have a multi-night image. It's not as, like it can take a long time. With like 900 frames to stack, it took like 45 minutes, something like that. You don't have to stay in the app while this is going on, but it's still a significant amount of time. And this is another area where something like the much more expensive Vespera 3 is superior because the way that it manages multi-night observations and stuff like star trail stacking, which I haven't really tested because it's not really my thing overall. But what I really like is the plan feature, because if you're wanting to use this for not so much for like star hopping and being like wowed by what you see, but you want to take like the best pictures possible of your targets, then that's where the plan feature comes in, because you can create your own plans and say like, okay, this is what I'm going to be imaging tonight. So I can create a new plan, say that it is a new plan. Plan is fine, I'm gonna call it plan. And yeah, we could say the first target, we're gonna put a large framing, so my 2x framing here, validate that, bam, and say plus on manual, and say that we're gonna image that from 8 to past midnight, right? Validate that, and then we can search for another target. Let's say search for Pleiades. I think they're becoming available at the end of the night. Say that, locate target position, and say, okay, I also want to change the framing a little bit, something like that. That looks good to me. And add it manual and say like the rest of the night is gonna be on the Pleiades, that kind of stuff. And you can see that for each of the targets, you can say, do you want your light pollution filter to be used? So I can tap on one, edit, and say, yes, light pollution filter will be on, validate that. The other one, edit, and light pollution filter on the Pleiades will be off. And now I have a plan for the entire night, and I can just start it and let the telescope do its thing. I don't need to do anything. When I wake up in the morning, it will have the images ready for me to use the AI processing enhance process on, or to do the processing on my own PC myself. And this is something that's been available on the Seestar, on the Varonis Vespera, on the Dwarf Lab smart telescopes for a while, but is really, really convenient to have. Now, another feature that there is the AI plan. The AI auto plan is like kind of giving you the best stuff for the whole night. Like, okay, you're going to take this, that, that, and kind of optimizing the altitude of the object. It's kind of interesting if you want to have like a night where you cannot stay up the whole night next to the telescope doing target hopping, but you still want to do like virtual target hopping. You can use the AI plan, and then it will just like put everything for the night. Now, something that I would love to see in a future update from ZWO, or any of the other smart telescope makers actually, is the ability to define your horizon. I'm on a rooftop balcony where I have a lot of visibility, but actually behind the camera, there's my rooftop, and there's the roof, like an additional floor of the house, and so it's blocking the view. I know that any object has to be at least above 60 degrees altitude in this direction. If I could tell the Seestar S50 Pro or any of those smart telescopes that, yeah, this is my horizon, like for this direction, it needs to be above 60 degrees, that kind of stuff. And then I could plan my plans or plan my targets based on my own horizon, and the AI plan could take that into account as well. That would be amazing. That would be chef's kiss, but it's not the case right now. But you can see there is a lot of power just with the main lens of the telescope. And the secondary lens, of course, can be used for wide field stuff, but I haven't really used it, to be honest. So we could go to Milky Way. And when going to Milky Way, there you go, it uses the main, the smaller, the wider field of view lens. I can move the telescope around, and just like with the narrow field, the zoom lens, I can capture images and it will do the same thing as usual. The autofocus is completed, and now it's starting to enhance the image exactly as it would with the large aperture. Except now we have a wider field of view, and of course we are in Tokyo, so being able to see a lot is not really something that we can expect. But if you are able to travel to darker locations, it can be really amazing. So here we have a super wide field image. We have 1 minute and 30 seconds of data. By the way, I can use the mark button there, and it will show me that, oh yeah, Vega is almost at the top there with Lyra, and we have the constellations that are overlapped on the image. Yeah, Vega is there, I can see it, which is pretty cool. And of course, just like before, we can use the AI enhance. But yeah, we are in Tokyo, so there's not a lot that can be recovered from that. Still, it's pretty cool with just this 1 minute of data that even from Tokyo we can see quite a lot of stars have been captured by the telescope. So there's a lot of fun to be had with the wide-angle lens as well. It's just not the fun that I've been really experimenting with because it's so hard from here. And here I'm also experimenting with the star trail mode. Ideally, I would want to point it towards Polaris, but just to give you an idea, it's basically taking those exposures and revealing the rotation of the Earth gradually. It's pretty cool as well. It's kind of fun. So yeah, there's a lot of fun that can be had with the wide angle lens, although it's not my specialty, right? Still, I wanted to briefly touch on that. I also wanted to quickly show you on the Seestar album the type of images that I was able to get directly from the Seestar AI Enhance on long stacks. So I'm kind of intentionally showing from the app, from the smartphone, because this is very obviously meant for sharing online on Facebook, on Instagram, on the community that's built in within the Seestar app, although I haven't really used it up to now. So yeah, basically here we have M27 that was across like several hours of data. And the original was this, the processed one is this, and we can see a large difference, and it's pretty cool to see that large difference. I have also processed all of the images on the computer, so I'll be showing you that afterwards. Here we have the Crescent Nebula. So this is the original, and then after processing. And you can see that the noise reduction was quite aggressive, perhaps too aggressive. Still, it's a pretty cool picture to have here of the sky turd, or the space turd, I guess, or brains in space. I like this target. This is a fun one. We have M13, so a globular cluster, Hercules cluster, really fun target, so original and then processed. We have M101, that's a tricky one. That was not a very long exposure on this galaxy. That's very faint. It's very difficult to get from Tokyo in the first place. And this is the original one and the processed one, which did manage to get a nebulosity, but at the cost of a lot of noise reduction. Here we have a small target, M51, the Whirlpool galaxy. The original is this, the processed is that. So again, like there's even nebulosity around like the smaller galaxy of the two. So this is actually pretty cool, especially again from Tokyo. And yeah, that gives you an example of what is possible for small galaxies with the S50 Pro. Then we have a wider object. This was a mosaic taken in alt-az mode during nights with a thin veil of clouds. So that's why you have like those halos around the bright stars. This is not the optics, this is just the weather. The original was this, and the processed within the Seestar app was this. And then we have really what I think is pretty amazing. This is again the same object, the North America Nebula, this time taken again as a mosaic, but in equatorial mode. This is 2 nights of data, not the whole nights on it, but still it's quite a lot of data. And this is the original and the processed, original and processed, and only processed in app, right, within the app itself. But of course, I'll show you the result of the process on the computer as well. Then this is what we just did together, the few minutes of M27. And here we have another picture that I took of the Veil Nebula. This is again in the equatorial mode, no mosaic. This is the before processing in the app and the after. So that should give us a good idea of what is possible with just the Smart Telescope and the app without needing to resort to anything outside of the Seestar app that basically comes with the Smart Telescope. This gives us a very good summary of the basic capabilities of the Seestar S50 Pro. And yeah, it's a very good telescope. Now, before I go into more about the telescope itself, let's have a look at the results of the telescope after I actually connected it to my PC and then took the images of the telescope, the stacks. Actually, I didn't bother to do any manual stacking, the stacks made by the telescope, and then processed them on the PC. I also want to show you the results of the very quick videos that I got on the sun and on the moon to see how we can get things sharper from these optics. So let's go inside and have a look at all of that. Before that, of course, this is a lot of work to prepare. So if you want to support me, you can like the video, leave a comment down below. What do you think of the Seestar S50 Pro? Do you think it is good? Do you think it is overpriced? Do you think it is underpriced? Probably not. Would you get it? Would you get the Seestar S30 Pro? Would you get a Dwarf Lab Dwarf Mini? Would you get something else? Let us know down in the comments. If you want to support me and you're planning on buying anything from ZW, like the Seestar S50, from Agena, High Point Scientific, etc., if you do so after clicking one of the links that I have down in the description or the pinned comment, it will help me out at no cost to you. And if you want to really become a VIP and really make this channel possible, you can become a channel member. It's the join button next to the subscribe button, or a Patreon member. The link is down in the description. Some of my Patreon members have access to my videos early and without ads. And if you want to just buy me a coffee, like quick, simple, small donation, really appreciate it. The link is down in the description. And you guys, you all know it. Everything is possible thanks to you. Thank you so much for your support and for your generosity. With that, let's go inside. Okay, so let's have a look at those results. So on my PC, let's start with the lunar and solar results. So remember that very short 60 seconds video that I took of the moon? Well, I've stacked I've stacked the best frames to be able to try to get the best amount of details that we can get from the moon using free software called AstroStackert. And here's the result. This is before any sharpening. So we're gonna crop the image and then apply some sharpening, and immediately you can see a huge amount of details on the moon with just a simple telescope like that. And I can really go deep into those details. That's like the final image of the moon, just 1 minute on it from this smart telescope. It's nothing crazy, it's nothing that I wouldn't expect, but still a very good result on such an object. It's always a lot of fun, and this was still bright outside. That's why we get this blue color, which is pretty cool. Now about the sun, similar stuff. So it was a 60-second video in total, and here we see some sunspots. There's not a lot of activity, and let's do some sharpening and some more sharpening, or curves, more sharpening, and that's basically what I ended up with. We see some details in the sunspots. This was taken right before sunset, really, right before I started recording at the start of this video. And so, yeah, the seeing was not the best, but it's pretty cool. We can see the sun, we can see the sunspots, and it's working very well here. So that gives you an idea for lunar and solar imaging with the S50 Pro. Now for the deep space stuff, Here is the images that I took with the S50 Pro during my testing. Let's start with M51. Here you can see, by the way, we have some stacking artifacts at the corners, and this is due to the field rotation. So if you're not familiar with that, when you're using a telescope in alt-az configuration, meaning that it's just rotating horizontally and vertically, you will actually get the targets, even though you're tracking them perfectly, they will rotate in your field of view because the Earth rotates. Super annoying, right? And so that's why we get those corners, and how crazy they get depends on how long you expose on a single target, and even also where the target is located in the sky. It gets pretty complex, but that's why we get that, and that's why we need to first crop the image, and then the processing that I did was very standard. After stretching, we get this. I can pop off the colors a little bit, play with the contrast, get more details, play around with the colors, and you can see this is M51 achieved here with the Seestar S50 Pro. Now, something I want you to look at is this star here, especially the blue slash purplish magenta halo around it. This is the one problem I've seen with the Seestar S50 Pro optics. If I go back to the original uncropped image, we can see the same here, right? So there's a little bit of chroma on these optics. Otherwise, if you look at the corners, the stars are nice and sharp. You can see the chroma again on these stars, and the actual sharpness of the optics is really no issue whatsoever. This is good optics, just a little bit of chroma. Now that's the one thing that I can complain about in this telescope, and it's an area where something like the Vespera 3 has better optics. It does not, at least my sample did not have this. And I do know that some other YouTubers have noticed the same thing on the Seestar S50 Pro, so this is not just my unit, at least as far as I know. Anyway, that was M51, gives you an idea of what we can accomplish on the galaxy. And remember, this is from Tokyo in summer, so the sensor runs hot with a lot of thermal noise. This is the worst case scenario you can pretty much imagine. So that was one image. Then we have an image of M27, so the one, it's not the one that we did together because that was just a few minutes. This is a bit longer. And this is the image without any processing. We can see the corner of the image suffering from field rotation, including the stars. You can see the stars themselves are suffering from the field rotation here. I think I had my exposure length on this one at 30 seconds. And despite being 30 seconds in alt-az, you can see the stars in the center are quite sharp, meaning it was able to track very well in alt-az with 30-second exposures. Now let's do the usual stuff. We crop the image and then we process it. And you can see from this image, this was on a single night. We have the corkscrew structure, we have the earlobes, and we have even the hydrogen alpha jets towards the top and the bottom, and we have the wide lobes of oxygen on the sides. So we do get quite a lot of detail, and then I reduced a little bit the star shapes. The next one is very simple, M13 Hercules cluster, and we can see the similar halos there on the side. Those halos, they disappear if you use the light pollution filter, because then the purple is kind of filtered out. But here, yeah, we have M13. We can see a couple of galaxies in the image as well. This tiny galaxy here, this tiny galaxy there. If you're new to astrophotography when you buy a smart telescope, I really recommend looking beyond your main target to go and see all of the crazy cool stuff that are visible. But anyway, M13, you can see that we have, again, the field rotation artifacts. This was taken in alt-az, so same processing as ever. And after a stretch, this is what we get, some color manipulation. And this is a very nice image, in my opinion, of the star cluster. Can you imagine the number of stars in this star cluster? Crazy. And then we have a little galaxy here as well as the little galaxy there. Really, really interesting stuff. And yeah, very, very sharp. Another example is the Veil Nebula. So this one was in Equatorial Mode. So that's why you see the cropping artifacts or the stacking artifacts are horizontal and vertical, right? They're only on the edges of the image. This is because the telescope does an operation called dithering automatically, where it moves the sensor slightly in between frames to avoid fixed pattern noise. And yeah, that's what we get. Let's do the quick processing as always. I can remove the stars for a bit just to see only the nebulosity, play with just the nebulosity, and then the final image with the stars placed back is this guy. I'm going to rotate it like this so we get an orientation we're more used to, right? But this is an image with 60-second exposures in Equatorial Mode, and that's just around 3 hours of data from Tokyo. So the next one I have is the Crescent Nebula, getting to this level right after stretching, which is, I think, pretty cool already. Removing the stars to have a good look at the nebulosity, increasing like the visible nebulosity, and sharpening the details. And then the final image is this one, placing the stars back, and this is what we get. But again, this is it's a super cool image to get from a simple smart telescope. Now this one is an interesting one. This is the North America Nebula in a mosaic mode in Equatorial Mode. And you can see it has 281 frames at 60 seconds each in Equatorial Mode. If we look at the stars, they're nice and sharp. There's maybe a tiny bit of elongation, I guess, if you squint on the stars, but we're really getting, like, the tracking has been really, really good, at least on my sample of this scope, like pretty amazing. And then if I do the processing on this little guy, I can crop it. After stretching, I get this. Then I can remove the stars for a bit, play with the colors, end up with that without the stars, and then I can place back the stars, and this is my final image. This is with a smart telescope from Tokyo using mosaic mode. Now, because this is the S50, we can zoom into a lot of the details in there, including the Pelican Nebula here. But if you wanted to just have like a single field of view with this image and you didn't need to zoom in or to print the image in a large format, the Seestar S30 Pro would be more than enough for that. So yeah, this is an example of just like a mosaic mode and what you can achieve with the mosaic mode on the Seestar S50 Pro. And that's why I think like all of the smart telescopes, they complement one another really well. You could have both the S50 Pro, the S30 Pro, and the Dwarf Mini, and you would still be using all three of them for different use cases. And all of them together, they're still less than $2,000 to have a super versatile like smart telescope group that can do pretty much anything. So that's something to keep in mind about those the smart telescopes. And my final sample image, this is another one that was taken in alt azimuth mode. You can see the stacking artifacts are pretty severe from the field rotation, which is due to the location of this target. This is the one where I have not enough data. It's a very faint target. There were high-level clouds. It's from Tokyo. This was very presumptuous of me to try this target, but I wanted to see. I wanted to push the telescope to its limits in very difficult conditions, really the worst case conditions on a very difficult target, and process it. And we go through the process as always. This is after the initial stretching, and then I can do some further manipulations, and this is what I get in the end. We still get some pretty good details on M101, and yeah, I think this is a good image to be getting from these conditions. Okay, so now that we've seen the results that this telescope is capable of, both within the app and also with post-processing in third-party software, well, let's talk a bit about the price. The price is just south of $1,000, so it's $999 or I believe $899 with the early bird discount that's going to be going on for I don't know how long. So it is definitely more expensive than any of the other smart telescopes that ZW has released. In fact, the only smart scope in this class that I can think of that is more expensive is the Vaonis Vespera. And both the Vespera 2, the Vespera 3, the Vespera 2 Pro are all far more expensive than this one. So the Vespera 3 that I reviewed recently on the channel, which is a great smart telescope, it's $2,500 with very similar specs. and then you have to buy the filters on top of that. And I know a lot of people were expecting to see the Seestar S50 Pro at around $800 US. I personally was expecting to see it as more of like 1,100 US, because I've seen the price of anything with electronics these days go up like crazy. I mean, look at the steam machine, for instance. Even if a large company like Valve has trouble with prices, what can ZW do? So I'm actually kind of surprised that they were able to keep it under $1,000, but maybe it's just my recency bias having reviewed the Vespera 3, which is super expensive, recently. So let me know what you think of the price down in the comments. I will say, like, in terms of how capable this smart telescope is, it's pretty incredible. I really struggled to find anything negative about the telescope, and yeah, the only thing that I really found was those like blue halos on bright stars when you're not using the light pollution filter, but everything else is really like spot on. It's exactly what I would have expected, and the biggest improvement compared to something like the original S50 is the tracking, and of course the field of view with the larger sensor. But the tracking, seriously, the tracking is amazing. The tracking was, I think, the most frustrating part for a lot of the original S50 users. This thing, at least the sample that I got, fixes that completely and more. I'm looking at this smart telescope and I'm thinking this could rival a lot of cooled astrophotography rigs that would be more expensive than buying this, and more and heavier and more difficult to transport around, etc. And if someone would be able to make a smart telescope with cooled sensor, with actively cooled sensor, like I've reviewed recently the Toptech AE676C camera, which can cool itself using only USB-C power. So it means it's probably possible from a power perspective to put that in a smart telescope. Maybe from a complexity kind of view, it's a bit more difficult. But if there was ever a smart scope like that, I think, like if I were able to take the S50 Pro, add active cooling to it, I think you would have to really struggle to find a reason to buy something like a Red Cat 51 plus a cooled 585 camera, plus a control center, plus a mount, etc., to try and rival this. So what I'm saying is that you get a lot of value for the admittedly high price that you pay for this telescope. So if you don't have a smart telescope right now and you're looking for something and you want something that you're okay with spending some money, and you want to look at galaxies and at small objects in the sky, this is what you want to get right now, my opinion. If you're more interested in larger nebulae, larger galaxies like the Andromeda Galaxy, you want to just dip your toes into the hobby, maybe something like the Dwarf Mini or the Seestar S30 Pro is more for you. If you already own something like the Seestar S30 Pro and you're kind of frustrated that you cannot go as deep as you'd like on small targets like small galaxies, M27, etc., then this can be a good complement kind of smart scope if you have the money for it and the inclination for it. And if you have the original S50, well, this is honestly, I think it's a massive upgrade. The only downgrade from the S50 really is the size and bulk of this thing. Otherwise, the tracking alone makes this a complete upgrade compared to the S50. And of course, you have the additional features with the wide-angle lens that's available. So yeah, it's a complete package that is very impressive, with very good optics, excellent tracking, very good battery life, a plethora of features within the app, and really excellent results as far as I'm concerned that I was able to get with this from Tokyo. I think it's a winner. So yeah, if you're interested in buying it, I'll have the link down in the description. And let me know what you think of this smart telescope. Do you think it's too expensive? Will you buy it? Will you ignore it? What do you have right now? Let us know down in the comments. If this video was useful, it was a lot of work to make. You can leave a like on the video. If you didn't like it, you can leave a dislike, of course. And thank you so much for watching till the end. If you want to support me even more and you're planning on buying anything from ZW, like a certain smart telescope here, or from Agena, High Point Scientific, First Light Optics, or even Amazon, if you do so after clicking one of the links that I have down in the description, it will help me out at no cost to you. If you want to help me directly and you want to do like a one-time donation, there's a Buy Me a Coffee link down in the description. A lot of people have chipped in. I'm really humbled by all of the support. Some of you guys really want me to overdose on caffeine. I cannot say how. yeah, I'm out of words. I'm really so thankful. So thank you so much for your support. And of course, if you want to support the channel on a continuous basis, you can become a channel member. It's the join button next to subscribe button. Or you can also join my Patreon. The link is down in the description, and some of my Patreon ranks have access to my videos early and without ads. And yeah, you know, it's all of you guys, you make this channel possible. You make all of these reviews possible. You make all this work possible. Thank you so much for your support and your generosity. With that, I hope this was interesting. I hope it was a good review. Let me know again down in the comments. Don't forget, whenever you can, to look up at the stars, and I'll see you next time.